I'll share a surprise story I prepared especially for you. The Arizona Territory, 1878, was a land that didn't show mercy. The sun baked the earth until it cracked, and the wind whipped the dust into the eyes of any soul brave enough to be out there. Cattle drives were the only thing that broke the stillness, thunderous hooves raising a storm that quickly faded once the herd was gone. For the men who moved through this land, men like Cole McKinnon, staying put was a rarity. Cole wasn't a man who liked to be known. He was a drifter, one whose name was lost as quickly as his shadow in the dust. A hired gun when necessary, a cattle wrangler when the price was right, and always a man who moved when he needed to, never lingering, never answering to anyone. But that day he stopped. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered trouble, but the sight of the woman sitting on the dirt, blood staining her arm and the wild eyes that met his, told him something different. It told him she wasn't just any woman. She wasn't some victim. No, this woman had been left for dead, but her pride and her will to survive burned far stronger than the desert sun that beat down upon them. Cole's horse came to a slow stop, his gaze flicking from the woman to the signs of a struggle. Torn leather, crushed branches, and hoof prints scattered in the sand. She'd been running, but something had caught her, something dangerous enough to leave her on the ground, barely holding on. His voice was low, his hand never straying far from the revolver at his side. "I'm not here to take anything." Her eyes never left him, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she pressed the cloth against her shoulder tighter, the wound seeping darker under the cloth. "Stay back," she finally said, her voice carrying the sharp cadence in a patchy tongue. Cole held his hands up, showing her they were empty. The last thing he needed was a fight, not when he knew the odds were stacked against him. "I'm just going to help you with that," he said, his voice calm, steady. There was a long pause. She didn't trust him. Of course, she didn't. Why would she? The desert had taught her that trust was something to be earned, and it wasn't given easily to strangers, especially to men. Still, she let him. Slowly, Cole moved toward her, taking out a strip of cloth, clean but well-worn. He pressed it gently to the wound. She winced, but didn't flinch. "You don't need to help me," she muttered. "Sure I do," Cole replied simply, glancing at her with steady eyes. "Name's Cole." "Now, Lynn," she answered, her voice strained but clear. "No titles, just names." He wasn't sure why, but that moment, so small, so simple, felt important. The wind shifted, and for the first time in hours, the dry heat seemed to lessen, if only by a fraction. There was no immediate danger, but the silence between them told him that wasn't the full story. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just injured, she was haunted. And whatever had done this to her, it wasn't done yet. As he moved to set up a small camp in a nearby AO, he couldn't help but wonder who'd left her like this, and why. She didn't seem the type to trust easily, and there was something in her, something fierce, that made him think she'd been fighting for a long time, with no one there to back her up. "Where you headed?" Cole asked as he worked. Now Lynn paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Away from here." Cole nodded. He understood. The Arizona Territory had no place for women like her, not unless they could fight like men or run faster than the dust. The fire flickered low, casting shadows across their faces as they sat in the cool desert night. Cole boiled some water over the fire, the crackling sound filling the silence. Na Lin kept her distance, her expression unreadable. "I've stitched up men who didn't want it," Cole said quietly, breaking the silence as he cleaned his needle. "You'll feel it, but it's the only way." Na Lin didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she watched him, the same way he had watched her since he found her in the AO. She wanted to know what kind of man he was. Was he the kind who walked away, or the kind who stayed? "Why'd you help me?" Na Lin finally asked after a long silence. Cole didn't look up. "Wouldn't be the first time I let someone bleed out, but this isn't about me." Na Lin stared at him, and for the first time since they met, she saw the truth in his eyes. There was no kindness in him, no pity, just an understanding that sometimes you made a choice. He had made his. The night passed in quiet tension. Neither of them slept easy, but at least for now, they weren't alone. The next morning, Nalin was already up before the sun had fully risen. She had learned that survival didn't wait for anyone. When Cole had finished packing up his camp, he turned to her. "Ready to move?" he asked. Nalin didn't respond right away. She had already decided. "Yeah," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "I'm ready." They moved with purpose, Cole leading the way with Nalin following. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh and unforgiving. They would keep moving until they found a place that could offer them shelter, or until the riders returned for Nalin. But Cole wasn't thinking about that yet. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about running. Nalin's wound had healed enough that she could move without much pain, but her mind was still on the men who'd hunted her down. They hadn't left her for dead. They wanted something from her, something dangerous enough to keep her running. But they didn't know what she knew. They didn't know who they were dealing with. By midday, they came across an old line camp, abandoned and weathered by years of neglect. The walls were sagging, but it was shelter. It wasn't a safe haven, but it was better than nothing. Nalin moved toward the fire pit, collecting rocks and brush. She glanced at Cole, her eyes softer now. She wasn't sure if she was more grateful or confused, but one thing was certain. Cole McKinnon was the first man in a long time who didn't look at her like she was just a target. That night, as they sat by the fire, the question that had been lingering in her mind since the day they met finally spilled out. "Why, help me?" she asked again, this time with more vulnerability. Cole looked at her, his face set in calm resolution. "I've done enough standing by." And in that simple answer, Nalin understood. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She wasn't waiting. She was building, alongside someone who understood that the fight wasn't over just because the sun went down. As the fire flickered and the desert night stretched long, Nalin realized that survival no longer meant hiding. It meant standing. Together,